Imagine being betrayed, abandoned, and unfairly condemned, and yet come out of this situation as a fundamental part of God's plan for humanity redemption. It looks like movie history, doesn't it? But this is the reality of Tamar, a woman who challenged the rules of a patriarchal society and became the game unexpectedly. Her narrative, hidden in the chapter Genesis 38, seems an interruption in Joseph's story, but actually reveals a drama full of betrayal, courage, and justice. Tamar was the victim of Judah's irresponsibility and his children, suffered the pain of widowhood, and faced the injustice of being discarded. But instead of accepting her destiny, she used intelligence and resilience to ensure what was right to her, and her attitude changed everything. What makes this story so powerful? Why did Tamar risk everything? And how did a seemingly shameful scandal work in the Messiah lineage? Today you will find out how this woman challenged the culture of the time and became a key piece in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Get ready for a surprising journey of betrayal, disguise, redemption, and transformation. Tamar's story is one of those Bible reports that challenge our expectations. At first glance, it seems like a plot of betrayal and scandal. But when looking more closely, we realize that it is a testimony of divine justice and redemption. The Bible does not hide human mistakes, and this is clear from what happened to Tamar and Judah. In a society where women had little or no decision-making power, she dared to challenge the injustices she suffered and, in the end, was recognized as more fair than Judah himself. But how could a woman challenge the patriarchy of the time and still come out victorious? Tamar was the victim of a succession of injustices, from a failed marriage to the negligence of Judah, who did not fulfill his word. With no options, and in the face of an uncertain future, she made a bold decision that would change her life, not only, but the Messiah's own lineage. His name, which could have been forgotten, became fundamental in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Most impressive is that this story, full of twists, shows us how God uses seemingly chaotic situations to fulfill his plans. What seemed to be a scandal was actually an instrument of transformation. How did this happen? How did Tamar turn the game in a world where the rules were against her? Let's dive into chapter 38 of Genesis to understand this plot that proves that divine justice always prevails. Tamar's story comes unexpectedly in the middle of the account of Joseph, but it is not there by chance. In Genesis 38, we see a crucial moment in the life of Judah, one of the sons of Jacob. After participating in the sale of Joseph as a slave, Judah moves away from his family and follows a path of his own. He is established in another land, marries a Canaanite woman, and has 3 children Onan and Selah. This detail may seem unimportant, but it is essential to understand what would happen to Tamar. The removal of Judah was not only geographical, but also spiritual. While Joseph thrived in Egypt under God's direction, Judah made questionable decisions, influenced by a culture far from his parents' faith. He allowed his children to grow without the same covenant with God that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had. This difference would soon become evident in their behavior and would have disastrous consequences. This background helps us understand why Tamar's story is so impactful. The social and family context was far from ideal, and it only increased the difficulties it would face. But even in the midst of a culture of injustice and negligence, something surprising was about to happen. The fate of Tamar and Judah's lineage was at stake, and God was about to intervene in a totally unexpected way. Tamar's marriage to Judah's firstborn, should have been the beginning of a new phase in his life. However, the story took a tragic course. The Bible does not come into many details about but one thing becomes clear: he was so wicked that God decided to take his life. It was not common for the biblical narrative to bring such an immediate judgment on someone, which indicates the gravity of their sins. Tamar, who should build a family next to him, was suddenly widowed and childless, an extremely difficult situation for a woman in that society. According to the tradition of marriage levirado, Onan, the younger brother, should marry Tamar to generate a child in the name of This custom guarantees the continuity of the lineage and the protection of the widow. However, Onan was not willing to do his duty. He had relations with Tamar, but he purposely prevented the conception, denying him the right to have a son who would preserve the name of his late husband. This act of selfishness and dishonesty did not go unnoticed by God, who also punished him with death. Now Tamar faced an even bigger dilemma. Widow for the second time, she depended on Judah's decision to have a future. The law required the next brother, the seal, to marry her when he was at the appropriate age. But Judah, fearing losing his last child, began to draw a plan to push her away. Tamar, however, would not accept being discarded so easily. What she would do next would show her intelligence, courage, and surprising determination. After the death of Er and Onan, Judah began to see Tamar as a bad omen. In his view, 2 of his children had already died after marrying her, and he feared that it would happen to his youngest son. The solution he found was to promise that when he grew, he would marry Tamar. But this promise was just an excuse to get rid of it. He sent her back to his father's house, a humiliating destination for a widow at the time. Upon being sent back, Tamar not only lost hope of having a child who would guarantee his future, but also suffered from the injustice of a system that discarded it without consequences for the men involved. Judah had an obligation to comply with the tradition of the Levirate marriage, but chose to ignore it, leaving Tamar without prospects. Time passed, and it was evident that he had no intention of fulfilling his word. But Tamar was not a passive woman in the face of injustice. She realized that if she waited for Judah, she would end up abandoned and without offspring. If society would not give her justice, she would find a means of guaranteeing her on her own. It was then that the plan came that would forever change the fate of this story and would put Judah in the face of his own flaws. Faced with the injustice he had suffered, Tamar made a bold decision. If Judah would not give her his right through a seal, then she would confront him in an unexpected way. She knew that 19 Judah would travel to Timnah and, disguising herself as a prostitute, was strategically positioned on the way. His goal was not revenge, but to ensure the right to be denied. By covering her face with a veil, she assured that Judah didn't recognize her, and her strategy was just beginning. Judah, not knowing who that mysterious woman was, approached her and negotiated a meeting. As a payment, he promised a kid from the flock, but Tamar required a guarantee until the animal was delivered. Here, her intelligence stood out. She ordered the seal, the cord, and the staff of Judah, objects that served as her personal identity. It was the equivalent of asking for someone's identity document these days, undeniable proof of their presence there. Judah, without suspecting, handed over the items and consumed the meeting. After the incident, Tamar disappeared before the payment was delivered. She was not interested in the kid, but in the test she had. Now I carried with it the guarantee that Judah could not deny what had happened. What seemed just another clandestine transaction would soon become a scandal that would expose Judah's own hypocrisy. And when the truth came to light, he would be forced to recognize who was really right in this story. Some time later, Tamar found out he was pregnant. For a woman in that society, getting pregnant out of marriage was a serious crime, and the scandal was soon to spread. As soon as Judah knew, she was furious and ordered her to be burned alive. His reaction was immediate and cruel, as if he had no responsibility in the situation. He, who had denied Tamar the right to have a legitimate son, now condemned her without even seeking to understand the truth. But Tamar had a letter in his sleeve. Before any punishment, he sent to Judah the objects he had kept: the seal, the cord, and the staff. With an impactful phrase, she threw the truth before him. Please, who these objects belong. Genesis 38:25. At that moment, Judah realized that he had been deceived by his own pride and hypocrisy. He, who wanted to punish her for an act considered immoral, was the real responsible for all that. Judah's attitude changed completely. He did not try to justify or blame Tamar. On the contrary, he publicly acknowledged, "She is fairer than me." Genesis 38:26. This was a moment of transformation, in which Judah not only took his mistake, but also began a journey of interchange. That man who had previously sold his brother Joseph as a slave now learned, in the worst way, about justice and redemption. And its story was still far from over. Despite all the controversy, Tamar's pregnancy was not just a momentary scandal. She carried 2 children in her womb, whose birth would mark the continuity of Judah's lineage. When the time came, something unusual happened. One of the babies, Zero, he reached out first, and the midwife tied a red thread on him, indicating that he was the firstborn. But surprisingly, the other baby, Perez, surpassed and was born first. This detail was not just a curious event. It carries a profound meaning within the biblical tradition. The idea of an unexpected child overcoming the firstborn appears several times in the scriptures, as in the case of Jacob and Esau, and even in the role of David as king of Israel. Perez, whose name means breach or rupture, symbolizes the way God often chooses unlikely ways to fulfill his purposes. This birth was much more than the continuation of Judah's offspring. It was an essential link for the Messiah lineage. Perez would become ancestral of King David, and generations later his name would appear in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. What began as a scandal of betrayal and injustice now became a divine plan of redemption. But how do Tamar and his children fit into the great narrative of salvation? The next point reveals a surprising detail. What looked just like a family drama within the tribe of Judah became one of the most significant events of biblical genealogy. Perez, Tamar's unexpected son, became one of King David's direct ancestors and later Jesus Christ. This detail may go unnoticed to many, but Matthew 1:3 makes it clear Tamar is one of the few women mentioned in the Messiah lineage. This teaches us a deep lesson. God uses unlikely stories to fulfill his purposes. Tamar could have been forgotten, another wronged widow in a patriarchal society. But for his courage and determination, he became an essential part of the redemption plan. His name crossed generations and was recorded in Scripture as an example of resilience and divine justice. The impact of this story goes beyond Tamar. God often chooses the despised, the marginalized, and the forgotten to accomplish something extraordinary. And Perez's lineage proves that. The birth of an unlikely child has paved the way for the King of Kings, showing that even in the midst of human failures, God is always in control. But what does this story teach us about justice, redemption, and God's act in the midst of chaos? Let's explore these following themes. Tamar's story teaches us that God's righteousness does not follow human standards. She was betrayed, abandoned, and unfairly condemned, but in the end, her courage and persistence were recognized. While Judah tried to avoid his responsibilities, God used his own situation to bring transformation and redemption. The moment Judah declared, "She's fairer than me," it wasn't just a confession, it was a change of perspective that would echo for generations. In addition to justice, this story also talks about redemption and purpose. Who could imagine that a rejected widow would become ancestor of the Messiah? This shows that God does not choose people for his status or the opinion of society, but for the heart and history he wants to tell through them. Tamar was not stuck in the role of victim. She acted wisdom and became an essential part of the divine plan. This story also challenges us to look beyond appearances and trust God's action, even when everything seems lost. Tamar was not an ordinary woman. He was a female resilience figure who faced a patriarchal society and found a way to justice. If God could turn his story so great, what can he do with our lives when we trust him? Tamar's story shows us that even in the face of injustice and abandonment, God still has the power to transform destinations. What seemed to be a plot of betrayal and scandal was revealed a divine plan for the arrival of the Messiah. If God used a rejected woman to fulfill her promise, imagine what he can do in your life. How many times have you felt wronged or forgotten? Tamar's trajectory teaches us that even when everything seems lost, God continues to write our story. The ending can be surprising and often much larger than we imagine. The secret is to trust and stay firm, just as Tamar did. If you like this story and want to learn more about Bible characters, subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you don't lose any of the next videos. And there is one more amazing story waiting for you right now. Click on the video that is appearing on the screen and continues this journey through the biblical world. Until next time,